Welcome to Guy Code, a podcast dedicated to imparting dad wisdom to my son, with your host, Koji Steven Sakai, and friends.
Alrighty, welcome to the 9th episode of Guy Code, and I'm your host, Koji. And this is a very special episode. This is done, obviously, during the Corona apocalypse. So we are doing everything via Zoom instead of in person. So please apologize for any kind of sound issues. But today's topic is going to be about food. And I've always had an interesting relationship with food. My dad was super sick all my life. He actually had a stroke when I was an infant. And he had a heart attack, and he would always just eat whatever he wanted to eat, which drove me nuts because I wanted him to eat healthy so he could live for a really long time. And over the course of just like arguing with him, I always I eventually ended up with a phobia about food and about what I was eating. And in college, it kind of came to a head after my father died, where food kind of equaled death to me. And I kind of stopped eating basically, and I got down, and I was still like playing baseball and doing track and all these things, and I was like down to like 120 pounds at about like 5'9". So I was really getting low. I don't really have those issues as much anymore, although sometimes it does come up. I mean, it's hard for me to look in the mirror and not see an obese person in the mirror or any pictures. So that's why I hate people taking pictures of me. But I'm better at ignoring that. And my big thing about wanting to do this now for me was I don't want to pass these kinds of issues on to my son, which is what this podcast is all about. But as you can see on the other side of this picture, the person who's joining me for this episode, thank you, is Lynn Chen, who is my favorite, who's my friend. And obviously she's a really famous actor, writer, director, and all around wonderful person. One of my favorite actors to talk to, and that's why she's on all my podcasts. Hi, Lynn.
Hey, how's it going?
Very good. Thank you. That was a super long intro. Sorry to make you just sit there and listen to all that.
No, it's always so interesting to hear because even though I know your history with food, it's still like, for us for people who've struggled with eating issues in the past, I myself included with this, we feel like it's such a part of our identity, but like from the outside, when other people, like our friends, even when they know, like it's so not a part of how people see you. It's not like I look at you and I'm like, Koji, he had eating issues, like I completely forgot about it until you just talked about it, even though I knew about this. And so, yeah, it's just like always interesting to hear, like, because it's so consuming in our heads. And oftentimes, like, we think that everyone's thinking that, but really it's just us.
Exactly. I mean, I used to, one of the things I learned was that me stressing out about what I was eating was probably worse. I was worse for my health than actually what I like eating a pizza or something. So that was like one of the things I had to really learn was just like stop thinking about it, stop like projecting on other people and myself, But Lynn, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, about your acting and tell us about your new movie too.
So yeah, I've been an actor my entire life, since I was, before I could like even speak, I was singing at the Metropolitan Opera House with my mom. And I have always loved performing. I've always loved being in front of people and doing my thing. And I've never had stage fright. And I've been doing it for a long time. But in the last 2 years, I sort of transitioned over into becoming a filmmaker. And so my filmmaking debut is a movie called I Will Make You Mine. And it will be out on demand on May 26th. It's available for pre-order now on iTunes and Apple TV. And yeah, so that's really exciting because I like to be in control of the story. And I also have a past history with food, which is why I wanted to talk about food. Not just, the eating disorder history that I was talking about, but for a long time, something that helped me get over my disordered eating was having a food blog. So I had a food blog for 10 years called The Actor's Diet. And it really opened me up to the world of restaurants and cooking. And I just really changed my relationship with food and fell in love with it. And so now I don't do that anymore. I've since developed celiac. So your relationship with food is like constantly changing. You have one way of eating and then something happens and then you have to switch. And I just think that that's like a very I mean, like we can go into it, like, but like that's a piece of advice I would offer your son is like, like things just change all the time and it's okay, you
Yeah.
know?
And my son's allergic to everything too, right? Or not too, but he's allergic to nuts and seeds and what else he's allergic to? Eggs and shellfish, and I mean, basically, he just can't eat almost anything at this point. So most Asian food is like off limits for him because of the fact that it has like sesame seeds, a lot of it, or sesame oil, right? So it's been tough trying to expose him to a lot of food. But let's get into it. Let's talk about the 10 pieces of advice around food. So why don't you start? What's your first piece of advice for my son?
Okay, so my first piece of advice would be about roasting everything. So even if you don't know how to cook, if you drizzle olive oil on basically anything, a vegetable, a protein, you can even roast some grains to make them taste a little bit nuttier. But if you roast it, you just let the oven do the work, and you will end up with something so delicious and caramelized and filling and feel like you've accomplished something major when really all you did was put things on a sheet pan and put them in the oven, and that's it. But it feels like gourmet. You feel like a chef when you've done that. So master the art of roasting.
That's a great one, actually. That follows my first piece of advice is learn how to cook. I say there's nothing sexier than being a cook, right? And my advice would be to learn about 5 to 6 dishes. And at first, I think cooking is a thing that at first you follow the recipe, but then you get good enough where eventually you could just kind of drizzle on it, right? Is at some point you kind of have a feel. That's why I tried to learn cooking for my mother, and I get so mad because she'd be like, just put a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And I'm like, how much? And she couldn't tell me because that's not how she cooked. And it wasn't until later that I realized that. But I definitely think that learning how to cook is a really, really important thing. And ultimately what I tell him is that when you cook, you get to cook it your way, and nobody could tell you otherwise because you're doing it for yourself. And if, like my wife has to eat whatever I cook and my son has to eat whatever I cook. So I think that's a really, really great piece of advice. So let me hear your next piece of advice.
Well, although cooking is very sexy, I also think that there's nothing sexier than somebody who cleans. So I feel like usually in my house, if one person cooks, the other person cleans. That's sort of the deal. But I also think that it's courteous, if you are the cook, to clean as you go. Like I often see people who don't cook. The reason it looks like a truck went through their kitchen is because they're not cleaning as they go. So like, for example, it'd be great to get a large bowl and put all of your scraps in there so that you don't constantly have to be like taking your vegetable scraps or whatever like piece of plastic that you peeled off over back and forth to the garbage. You can just have one huge large bowl that you can just stand in one place, chop, 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 put them away, and then at the end, put that garbage into the garbage bowl, and then put all the garbage bowl into the garbage. So like you're minimizing steps, and you're cleaning as you go. Like, you should be wiping down I was going to say station like I was a chef, but like you should be wiping down your cleaning area as you're going, so that like, and you have time, like while you're waiting for something to heat up, while you're waiting for something to sear, while you're like waiting the 3 minutes, take the time and like clean what's happening around you so that you're not left with like a ton of dishes at the end. I feel like, it goes along with the whole Marie Kondo, like just make a space for everything. It's going to ease your mind, I think, and you'll be a better cook if you have everything in its place and you're not just sort of like feeling like, oh my God, I need to do this. And then when you look around, it's a mess. You'll feel like a mess. And I think if you cook and clean at the same time, you'll feel like less of a mess and your food will taste better.
That's really, really great advice. Because I do totally agree. When people cook, when people start to cook and they don't know how to cook, it's just like when people walk through it, it's like, oh my! At the end, it's a mess. And I had to talk to my niece about that. She's like, I'm a great cook. She came over to my house and cooked, and I'm like, it's awesome, but look at this mess. So I was trying to, like, next time she cooked, I was showing her I was like, oh, look, like we could wash dishes now. We could put away the dishes. We could dry the dishes. We could throw away the food scraps and stuff and do all that stuff. So that's great. A piece of advice. My next piece of advice is about trying new food. I think there's no better way to explore a culture than eating its food. And most importantly, I just don't want you to be the kind of person that goes to another country and eats McDonald's. You have to try the real important food. And on a side note, on a healthy note, I think one of the best ways to be healthy is eating different kinds of food and a wide variety of foods, and not just eating only, 2 things or 3 things, but really trying to be as wide as possible in terms of real food. So that's my piece of advice. What's your next piece of advice?
Okay, so this is probably coming up a lot for me because of the quarantine, but I've been thinking a lot about like saving food and making it last. So I feel it's important to learn what you can freeze and what you can't freeze. And that's just like as easy as Googling something. But there are certain like fruits and vegetables that you should not freeze, or that you need to like blanch first or prep first. But I think that like sometimes, especially like when we're buying a lot of groceries, we get overwhelmed and feel like, oh, I have to use all of this right now. Or even like, the concept of freezing leftovers, like so that you don't feel like, oh my God, I have to eat this chili 4 days in a row. You don't have to. You can freeze half the batch, eat half of it, and then 2 months from now, go into your freezer and you have that chili. You're going to be so happy that that chili is there. Similarly, like when you're baking, like, because we're all doing a lot of baking right now, you don't have to bake all 24 cookies. You can freeze the dough and then bake them off one at a time when you feel like it. So I think get to know your freezer really well, and it'll give you a lot less anxiety about feeling like you have to eat everything at once. And then, you're saving money and you're saving food.
That's hilarious, because I have a very interesting relationship with leftovers. Well, I have this personal rule. It's weird that I can only eat leftovers one time, and after that I can't eat it anymore. So it's really hard on the family when it's like we have a lot of leftovers, and we're just like, well, I'm like, I ate it once, I can't eat it again. I'm sorry. And so that is a good point. Maybe I could freeze it and I could try to save it rather than having my wife eat it for 4 days while I move on to different food. That's a good note. Okay, so my next piece of advice is around, it's not necessarily food, but it's kind of, it's food related, which is that, you look great. That you look great all the time. And that, that voice in your head that's saying that you're fat, it's not real. And especially in the 20s, I was just looking at a picture of myself in the 20s. I was like, I looked hot in my 20s. I look great, and the only time that you have to worry about that you do need to lose some weight would be if the doctor tells you, because you're overweight. And then, and the only reason I think about this now is that my son eats like a goldfish, which is to say that he eats so much food that he throws it up. And so we need to learn to not do that. But it is important just to know that, you look great. It's okay that you're not as fat as you think you are, or you're not ugly. So it kind of all comes back to food. But what do you think of that? And what's your next what is it? Advice.
I love that. I love that. I feel like positive self-talk is a really big thing that everyone should learn to do. Especially because often when somebody else is giving you criticism, it's often their own issue that they're saying. So I love that you're like, unless it's a doctor, like even your own parents can say something to you, like you look fat, and really it's like, because they looked in the mirror that morning and felt fat, and that's why they're saying it. So, but that's not my advice, but I completely agree with you. My next piece of advice is about dieting, actually, because a lot of people will you'll probably hear a lot of dieting advice throughout your life. And I think the most important thing is to know that everyone's body is different, the same way like your body rejects shellfish and other people don't. Like, you just can't take what other people are saying as advice that you should follow on your own. Like, so I guess like that negates everything we're saying right now. But in general, I think when it comes especially to losing weight, that we should not be taking the advice of just like everyone as being like the cold, hard facts. I think you need to experiment and figure it out for yourself when it comes to what works best for your body and optimizing how you feel over how you look.
That's really great advice, because I think that everybody thinks that there's a miracle to lose weight, or there's one way to do it, but you're right, everybody's body is totally different. I mean, some people could work out all the time and still be a little bit chubby, or they could work out all the time and it goes away right away, right? For me, especially like when I got older, I realized that it's harder to keep it off, right? I have to work out more than I did before. I could just, I didn't have to do anything. I could work it all off. Although a funny story is my son he does a lot of sports, and he was taking off his shirt to go to the bath, and now he had a 6-pack. And I was like, oh my God, you have a 6-pack. I've never had a 6-pack my whole life. And he said, and he got scared. Because he thought a 6-pack was something bad. And so he thought that it was like something to not want. I was like, it doesn't matter. You can have whatever you have. But it was just funny that he thought it was like something negative instead of something positive. But my next piece of advice is around drinking water, which is to say, just drink a lot of it. So don't drink soda, which he doesn't drink. I don't think he's ever had soda yet. So that's one thing. But don't drink soda. Don't drink a lot of juices. Limit your alcohol. But, drink a lot of water. And the key to water, I think, is that if you're thirsty, it's too late. You should have drank water before you got thirsty, because dehydration occurs the moment that you've already lost it if you've drank. And you got to keep drinking throughout the day and making sure that you're well hydrated. I think that my mom was really bad at that, and that's something that she definitely wanted to pass on to me all the time. And I think
I'm thirsty. I'm thirsty right now. Let me grab some water.
I have some water too. I'll drink some water too.
Ooh.
Yes. That was our water.
I guess I was dehydrated. Okay. This is my last piece of advice. Okay. So this I actually learned recently. It's not like life changing or anything, but for me, it kind of was. So I learned to cook by watching Food Network, and I always thought that cracked black pepper was the way to go, because you always see the chefs take out that pepper mill and start putting pepper on when they're seasoning their food. It's always like a handful of salt and fresh cracked black pepper. And that's what I was doing forever, until one day for Christmas, I got sent ground black pepper, like already ground black pepper. And I started to use that as a seasoning instead. And suddenly I was like, my food tastes better. Wait a second. What's happening here? And I realized what it was that I got tired putting the pepper on, that I wasn't adding enough pepper to really season it. So now that I add ground black pepper, I can actually taste the pepper, and pepper tastes amazing. So anyway, my advice is to use ground black pepper when you're cooking, and to use the cracked black pepper maybe only as like a finishing, which is probably why at restaurants they put it on as like a finishing touch, so that you can like just have it there. Like it's more coarse. But like when it comes to actually seasoning your food, use the ground black pepper.
I never thought about that. That's really, really interesting. I'll have to think about that, because I have both. My kitchen has both of them. So next time I'm gonna try it, and I'll let you know how that goes. My last piece of advice though is when you have a family, make sure they eat together at least one meal a night, a day, only because families that don't eat together, they don't stay together. And so, one of the things that I always think, everything comes back to, for Japanese Americans, everything comes back to the internment camps. And one of the legacies of the internment camp was that, families didn't eat together. And a lot of the problems in the community happened because the families stopped eating together and stopped hanging out together. And so I do think it's important that as a family unit, whether it's a boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever, and kids, that on some level every day you get together. I mean, obviously you don't have to do it every single day, but as much as possible, you get together and you make it home and you get it. In my own life, this is something that was really important to my mom. When we were kids, my mom would open the door on summer days, let me go, but I had to be back by a certain time to make it for dinner, because I needed to sit down with the whole family. And I think that really bonded us as a family in a lot of ways.
Totally. I mean, like that's all I remember from my childhood is dinner.
Yeah.
I don't remember breakfast or lunch really, because those were always by myself, but like dinner with the family. I still remember like how my dad chewed. I can still see him sitting next to me chewing.
Well, and so much of like our time is eating, and that I think is important to have a conversations, and we can learn about each other and the politics and really like discuss things and talk about our day. But even though a lot of times for my son, it's like watching TV or, doing other stuff, but I definitely try to make it a point to eat every day. Did we miss any advice for you about food, or do we cover pretty much everything you wanted to cover?
I mean, I could talk forever about food, but those were the main ones that I was thinking that I wanted to pass along. I mean, I could just go. We could just keep going and going and going.
That's hilarious, because this is the one subject that I had a really, really, really hard time coming up with enough stuff.
Oh, that's so funny.
Because when I cook, like, because I cooked for my dad when he was sick, and I used to cook for him because my mom worked all the time, and I grew up cooking like whatever's in the fridge. I just have to make something, and out of that food, and so like my relationship to food back then was really interesting, and especially like I'd cook for my dad. I'd be like, we're gonna have like chicken with no seasoning on it, because that's like best for him, right? Or just a little bit of salt and a little bit of other stuff, but like not like I couldn't put a lot of other stuff because I didn't want him to die. And so I remember even for me, for cooking has been really, really challenging. And the other thing for me, the only thing I should have said about food also is that I'm always like walking the line of a vegetarian. Like I can't really cook food. Like I hate cooking meat. It actually grosses me out. And usually I usually don't want to eat it after I cook it. And so in general, like I love cooking vegetables. So if I could just have a vegetable meal, that would be ideal for me. What I usually try to do with my guests is I ask them for any life advice that outside of food that you'd want to impart to my son. Is there anything that off the top of your head comes up?
I mean, I think I said it already, but like that this advice that we're giving, sort of see if it rings true instinctually, I guess, for you, and take it or leave it. We don't live in your head. We don't live in your body. We don't live in your mind. So, I feel like life in general, it's like a buffet. It always comes back to food, where you see the different choices laid out in front of you and you take what you want and you can leave the rest. It's fine.
Although,
it's totally fine.
Can I say that you remember that you're about my age? So, remember that song, the Always Wear Sunshine song or sunscreen song?
Oh, yes. It was like a big graduation song.
Yeah. Like I listen to that now and I'm like, every piece of advice from that was amazing.
I'm glad it rings true to you now.
I was like, wow, like this is like, I wish I listened to this when I was like, I mean, I heard it obviously when I was graduating college, but it's like, I didn't think about it, but every piece I was like, you're really stop looking at beauty magazines. Like, who cares if you don't know what you want to do with your life? I don't know what I want to do at 40. It was amazing. So if you have time, you should totally check that out.
I'm going to re-listen to that. But that just goes to show, it's like, if it doesn't ring true to you, then it doesn't mean it's never going to ring true to you. Yeah. But like, there's a reason why there's a time and a place for everything.
Yeah.
I'm sure like you heard it back then. You just wasn't, vibing with you.
I was like, that's cute.
Thank God it exists.
I was like, that's cute advice. That's cute advice. You're old. and that's kind of what this is actually. So what this project for me is that, I don't expect him at 20 to be like, this is sage advice from everybody. What I imagine is that I want him to listen to it throughout his life and be like, at whatever time some of this will hit and some of it won't. Like last week, I read him the 13 Crack Commandments from Notorious B.I.G. as like money advice or business advice. And he was like, what does that word mean? I was like, never mind. Don't worry about that. It's the message. Listen to the message. Listen to the message.
Oh my God. I love it.
But thank you so much for coming on and for me to interrupt your self-quarantine.
My sitting on the couch.
You're sitting on your couch.
Thank you for interrupting my sitting on the couch. I'm going to go back to sitting on the couch.
Well, we appreciate your advice, and if you're open to it, I'd love to have you in future episodes for other pieces of advice. So thank you so much. That. And where can people follow you? Or I know you don't do the blog, but where can people follow you?
Just go to lynnchen.com, and I actually did do a blog post the other day because I got really bored and was like, I'm going to write about my quarantine habits. Just missed writing it. But yeah, just go to lynnchen.com. It has the links to everything, my social media, the movie, everything.
Great. And one more time, what was the movie called?
It's called I Will Make You Mine, out May 26th.
And they can find it on iTunes and wherever else.
Yeah, everywhere. It'll be like everywhere. Amazon, iTunes, PlayStation, wherever you get your cable, DVD, it'll be everywhere.
And I know my wife is super, super excited about it. And I'm
Oh, I
excited
can't wait for her to see it.
All right.
Wait for you both to see it.
Thank you so much for your time, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.